Marcus Chen stood in his expensive black suit, looking at his reflection in the glass window of his office. Today was the biggest day of his life. After 10 years of building TechFlow Industries from a small startup into a major manufacturing company, he was finally going to sign the deal that would make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. The contract with Global Corp was worth $50 million. $50 million. Marcus had dreamed about this moment for months. He had practiced his presentation countless times, bought a new Rolex watch just for the occasion, and even hired extra security guards to make sure everything went perfectly. His secretary knocked on the door. "Mr. Chen, the Global Corp executives have arrived. They're waiting in the main conference room." Marcus straightened his tie and smiled confidently. "Perfect. Tell them I'll be right there, and make sure the factory tour is ready. I want them to see our best production line running at full capacity." The TechFlow factory was Marcus's pride and joy. Located in the small industrial town of Millbrook, surrounded by farms and countryside, it was a modern facility filled with the latest technology. The centerpiece was a massive German-made production machine that cost over $2 million. This machine could produce high-quality electronic components faster than any competitor in the industry. Marcus walked through the factory floor, greeting his workers with fake smiles. He didn't really care about these people, but today, he needed everything to look good. The Global Corp team was known for being very careful about the companies they worked with. They checked everything, from worker safety to production quality. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus announced loudly. "Today is a very important day for our company. I expect everyone to work their best and show our visitors what TechFlow Industries can do." The workers nodded and continued their tasks. Most of them had been with the company for years, working hard to build the business while Marcus took all the credit. They knew about his arrogant personality, but they needed their jobs, so they stayed quiet. At exactly 10 a.m., Marcus led the group of 5 Global Corp executives into the factory. These were serious business people wearing dark suits and carrying expensive briefcases. Their leader was James Mitchell, the company's vice president of operations. He had a reputation for being very tough and demanding. "Welcome to TechFlow Industries," Marcus said with his biggest smile. "I'm excited to show you why we're the best choice for your manufacturing needs." The tour started well. The executives nodded approvingly as Marcus explained their quality control systems and showed off their clean, organized workspace. Workers operated smaller machines efficiently, and everything looked professional and impressive. Then they reached the main production area, where the giant German machine dominated the space. This was Marcus's favorite part of the tour. The machine was beautiful, with shiny metal surfaces, blinking lights, and complex control panels that looked like something from a science fiction movie. "This is our crown jewel," Marcus said proudly, patting the side of the machine. "We imported this directly from Germany last year. It's the most advanced production unit in the entire region. This single machine can produce more high-quality components in one day than our competitors can make in a week." The Global Corp executives were impressed. They took notes and asked technical questions that Marcus answered confidently. Everything was going exactly according to plan. "Now let me show you this machine in action," Marcus said, walking to the main control panel. "You'll be amazed by how smooth and quiet it operates." He pressed the start button with a theatrical flourish, expecting the usual gentle hum of the machine starting up. Instead, there was a loud grinding noise that made everyone jump backward. Clang, screech, bang! Sparks began flying from the control panel like a 4th of July fireworks show. The machine shook violently, and thick black smoke started pouring out of several openings. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, and an alarm began blaring so loudly that workers from across the factory came running to see what was happening. Marcus stared in horror as his million-dollar machine destroyed itself before his eyes. The grinding noise got louder and louder until suddenly, with one final tremendous crash, everything went silent. The machine was completely dead. "What's happening?" James Mitchell shouted over the noise of the fire alarm that had automatically activated. "Is this normal?" "No, no, no," Marcus screamed, frantically pressing buttons on the control panel. Nothing worked. The expensive German machine was as dead as a rock. This has never happened before. The machine was working perfectly yesterday. The factory's chief engineer, a nervous man named Robert Kim, came running over with his toolkit. His face was pale with panic. "Mr. Chen, I don't know what went wrong. All the systems were normal this morning during our routine check." Marcus felt his dreams crumbling around him. The Global Corp executives were whispering among themselves, and their expressions had changed from impressed to very concerned. Some were already taking out their phones, probably to call their headquarters and report the disaster. "Can you fix it?" Marcus demanded, grabbing Robert by the shoulders. "How long will it take?" Robert opened several panels and looked inside the machine with a flashlight. After a few minutes of inspection, he stood up with bad news written all over his face. "Mr. Chen, this is really bad. The main processing unit has completely failed, and it looks like the failure caused damage to several other systems. This isn't something we can fix with basic repairs." "What does that mean exactly?" James Mitchell asked, his voice cold and professional. "It means we need to contact the German manufacturer and have them send a team of specialists," Robert explained. "This machine is too advanced and complex for our regular maintenance staff. We'll need to order new parts from Germany, and they'll have to send engineers to install everything properly." Marcus felt like he was going to faint. "How long will that take?" "At least a week, maybe 2, Robert said quietly. "And that's if we're lucky, and they have the parts in stock." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked at the Global Corp executives who were now clearly unhappy and disappointed. 2 weeks was completely unacceptable. They needed a reliable partner who could deliver products on schedule, not a company whose main production line could randomly explode during a bore. Simple demonstration. "I'm very sorry about this," Marcus said desperately. "This is just a minor technical problem. We have backup systems, and we can still meet all your production requirements." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus knew he was lying. Without the main machine, TechFlow Industries couldn't produce enough high-quality components to fulfill a $50 million contract. The backup equipment was older and much slower. James Mitchell looked at his watch. "Mr. Chen, we have a very tight schedule. We can't wait 2 weeks for your equipment to be repaired. We need to make a decision about our manufacturing partner today." Marcus felt his world falling apart. 10 years of building his company, months of negotiations, and millions of dollars in potential profit were all disappearing because of one stupid machine malfunction. As he stood there in his expensive suit surrounded by smoke and broken dreams, Marcus noticed a young man standing near the factory entrance. The boy looked about 19 years old, wearing simple work clothes, old boots, and a baseball cap. He had dirt under his fingernails and looked like he had just come from working on a farm. The young man was watching the chaos with curious eyes, as if he found the whole situation interesting rather than tragic. This made Marcus even angrier. Here he was, facing the worst disaster of his business career, and some random farm kid was standing there watching like it was free entertainment. Marcus felt his frustration and embarrassment boiling over into pure rage. He needed someone to blame, someone to take out his anger on. And this simple country boy seemed like the perfect target. Marcus Chen's anger was like a volcano ready to explode. His face turned bright red as he stared at the young man in work clothes, who was calmly watching the disaster from near the factory entrance. The boy seemed completely unbothered by all the chaos, smoke, and shouting around him. This made Marcus even more furious. "You!" Marcus shouted, pointing his finger directly at the young man. His voice was so loud that everyone in the factory turned to look. "What do you think you're doing here?" The young man, whose name was David Harrison, looked up with surprised eyes. He had been driving through town in his father's old pickup truck when he heard all the commotion coming from the TechFlow factory. Being naturally curious about machines and technology, he had stopped to see what was happening. "I'm sorry, sir," David said politely, taking off his baseball cap. "I heard there was some kind of trouble and thought maybe someone might need help." Marcus marched over to David, his expensive leather shoes clicking loudly on the concrete floor. The Global Corp executives followed behind him, wondering what their potential business partner was going to do next. This was certainly not the professional, factory tour they had expected. Help? Marcus laughed bitterly. You think you can help, kid? Look at yourself. You're covered in dirt, wearing old work clothes, and you probably don't even know what that machine does. David glanced at the smoking German machine and then back at Marcus. Well, sir, it looks like it's some kind of advanced manufacturing equipment. From the sound it was making before it stopped, I'd guess there was probably a mechanical failure in the main processing unit. This answer surprised everyone, including Marcus. Most people wouldn't have been able to identify anything about the complex machine, but this farm boy seemed to understand at least the basics of how it worked. Lucky guess, Marcus said dismissively. Anyone could see there was a mechanical problem. The real question is what kind of person just walks into a private factory without permission. This isn't some roadside attraction where country kids can come gawk at expensive equipment they'll never be able to afford. The other factory workers started gathering around to watch the confrontation. They had seen their boss be rude to people before, but this seemed especially mean. The young man hadn't done anything wrong except show up at the wrong time. James Mitchell, the lead Global Corp executive, was taking notes on his phone. He was writing down everything he saw, including how Marcus treated other people. Global Corp was very careful about the character of their business partners. They didn't want to work with companies that had poor leadership or bad values. I really am sorry for bothering you, David said calmly. I was just curious about the machinery. I work with equipment on my family's farm, so I'm interested in how different machines operate. Farm equipment? Marcus laughed even louder. You think fixing a rusty old tractor is the same as understanding a $2 million piece of German engineering? Kid, this machine is more advanced than anything you've ever seen in your entire life. David didn't argue or get angry. He just nodded, respectfully, and started to turn away. You're absolutely right, sir. I'll leave you alone to handle your business. But Marcus wasn't finished. He was feeling humiliated in front of the important clients, and his pride was hurt. He needed to prove his superiority somehow, and this humble farm boy seemed like an easy target. Wait a minute, Marcus called out, an idea forming in his twisted mind. Since you think you know so much about machines, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? David stopped and turned back around. What do you mean, sir? Marcus smiled cruelly. He had thought of a perfect way to embarrass the boy and maybe distract the Global Corp executives from the factory's problems. I'm going to make you an offer, farm boy. A challenge if you're man enough to accept it. The factory became completely quiet, except for the sound of the cooling fans trying to clear out the smoke. Everyone was listening to see what would happen. Next, here's the deal, Marcus announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. You seem to think you understand machines, so I challenge you to fix our equipment. If you can get that machine running properly in the next 60 minutes, I'll personally write you a check for $10,000. Several workers gasped. $10,000 was more money than most of them made in several months. It was a fortune for someone who looked like a simple farm worker. But, Marcus continued with a nasty grin, when you fail, and believe me, you will fail miserably, you have to get out of here and never set foot in my factory again. You'll also have to admit in front of everyone that you don't know anything about real machinery. The challenge was obviously unfair. The company's own trained engineers had already said they couldn't fix the machine without help from German specialists. How could a random farm boy succeed where professional technicians had failed? David looked at the broken machine, then at Marcus, then at all the people watching him. He could see that this was some kind of test, though he didn't understand why. The businessman was being so hostile to a complete stranger. That's quite an offer, David said thoughtfully. But I have to ask, why are you doing this? I haven't done anything to bother you. Because I'm tired of people who don't know their place, Marcus replied harshly. You walked into my factory, like you belonged here, acting like you could help with problems that require real expertise. I want to teach you a lesson about respect and knowing your limitations. James Mitchell was now openly frowning at Marcus's behavior. The other Global Corp executives were also looking uncomfortable. They had come here to evaluate TechFlow Industries as a potential business partner, but Marcus was showing them a side of his personality that they didn't like at all. So what do you say, kid? Marcus pressed. Are you brave enough to accept my challenge, or are you going to run away with your tail between your legs? David was quiet for a long moment. thinking carefully about the situation. He could see that Marcus was trying to humiliate him for some reason. The smart thing would probably be to just leave and avoid any trouble, but there was something in the businessman's attitude that bothered him. Marcus was being cruel just because he thought he could get away with it. Finally, David made his decision. "All right, sir. I accept your challenge." The crowd murmured with surprise and excitement. Some people thought the young man was brave, while others thought he was just foolish. Marcus's smile grew even wider and more unpleasant. "Excellent," Marcus said, clapping his hands together. "This should be very entertaining. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to witness what happens when country boys try to play with big city technology." He turned to his chief engineer. "Robert, give him whatever tools he asks for. I want everyone to see exactly how helpless he is when faced with real machinery." Robert Kim looked uncomfortable with the whole situation, but he nodded obediently. "Yes, sir." Marcus checked his expensive Rolex watch. "You have exactly 1 hour starting now. When you fail, and I guarantee you will fail, I want a complete apology in front of all these witnesses." David walked over to the broken machine and began examining it carefully. He ignored the whispers and stares from the crowd of workers and executives who had gathered to watch. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, already planning the harsh words he would use when the farm boy admitted defeat. What none of them knew was that David Harrison was not just any ordinary young man from the countryside. He had secrets that would soon shock everyone in that factory, especially the arrogant CEO who thought he was so much smarter than everyone else. The challenge had been accepted, and the clock was ticking. David Harrison stood in front of the massive broken machine, completely calm despite having dozens of eyes watching his every move. The factory workers whispered among themselves, some feeling sorry for the young man who had accepted an impossible challenge. Others were curious to see what would happen next. Marcus Chen stood nearby with his arms crossed, wearing a satisfied smile. He was already imagining how he would humiliate the farm boy in front of the Global Corp executives. Maybe this embarrassing show would distract them from the factory's problems and save his $50 million deal. "Well?" Marcus called out, impatiently. "Are you just going to stand there looking at it, or are you actually going to try something? You have 58 minutes left." David ignored the mocking tone and began walking slowly around the entire machine. He examined it from every angle, running his hands along its metal surfaces and listening carefully to the sounds it was making. Even though the machine was turned off, it was still making small noises as the metal cooled down and various systems settled. What nobody in that factory knew was that David wasn't just a simple farm worker. While he did help run his family's agricultural business, he had also graduated at the top of his class from the state university with a degree in mechanical engineering. His father had always believed that education was just as important as hard work. During his 4 years at university, David had studied the most advanced manufacturing equipment in the world. He had written research papers about German industrial machinery and had even spent a summer internship at a factory that used equipment very similar to this one. But David had never bragged about his education or tried to impress anyone with his knowledge. His father had taught him that truly smart people don't need to show off. They just quietly do their work and let their actions speak for themselves. As David continued his examination, he began to see patterns that others had missed. The way the smoke had come out of certain panels, the specific sounds the machine had made before breaking down, and the pattern of the sparks all told him a story about what had gone wrong. "Can I get a basic toolkit?" David asked Robert Kim, the chief engineer. Robert looked at Marcus, who nodded with amusement. "Give him whatever he wants," Marcus said. "I want everyone to see how lost he gets when he actually tries to do something." Robert brought over a standard toolkit with screwdrivers, wrenches, and other basic equipment. David thanked him politely and began opening access panels on the machine. As he worked, he started explaining what he was doing, speaking to the crowd that had gathered around him. "The first thing you need to understand," David said as he removed a panel, "is that complex machines like this rarely have just one problem. Usually, one small failure causes other failures, like dominoes falling down in a line." Several of the factory workers moved closer, genuinely interested in what he was saying. Even some of the Global Corp executives were paying attention. David's calm confidence and clear explanations were very different from what they had expected. From the sound, "This machine made before it stopped working," David continued. "I think the main problem started with a sensor malfunction. When sensors give wrong information to the computer makes wrong decisions about how to operate the machine." Marcus was getting annoyed that people were actually listening to the farm boy. "Stop wasting time with explanations," he said sharply. "Either fix it or admit you can't." David smiled and kept working. He had found the main control computer and was now examining the wiring and connections. His trained eyes quickly spotted several issues that the factory's regular maintenance team had missed during their routine checks. "Here's the first problem," David said, pointing to a small electronic component. "This sensor is completely burned out. When it failed, it sent wrong signals to the main computer. The computer tried to compensate by working the mechanical systems harder, which caused them to overheat and break down." He continued tracing wires and checking connections, finding more and more problems as he worked. Each issue he discovered was connected to the others, creating a chain reaction of failures that had destroyed multiple systems in the machine. The factory workers were amazed by how quickly David was identifying problems that their own engineers had missed. Even Robert Kim was taking notes, learning things about the machine that he had never understood before. "The good news," David said as he worked, "is that most of these problems can be fixed without ordering new parts from Germany. The bad news is that someone made some serious mistakes during the machine's installation and maintenance." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. Was this farm boy suggesting that TechFlow Industries had done something wrong? "What do you mean by mistakes?" he asked nervously. David held up a handful of wires that had been connected incorrectly. "These connections don't match the manufacturer's specifications. Someone tried to take shortcuts during installation, probably to save time or money. It worked for a while, but eventually the wrong connections caused the sensors to malfunction." The silence in the factory was deafening. Marcus realized that David was right. When the German machine had been installed, Marcus had hired the cheapest technicians he could find instead of paying for the manufacturer's certified installation team. He had saved money in the short term but had created a disaster waiting to happen. James Mitchell, the Global Corp executive, was writing furiously in his notebook. This information about poor installation and maintenance was exactly the kind of thing his company needed to know about potential business partners. David continued working steadily, replacing the burned-out sensor with a spare part he found in the machine's own emergency kit. He reconnected wires properly, reset various computer systems, and made several small adjustments that nobody else had thought to try. "Most machines like this come with backup parts and emergency procedures," David explained as he worked. "The manufacturers know that things can go wrong, so they design ways to fix common problems quickly. The trick is knowing where to look and what to do." As David made his final adjustments, the crowd watched in growing amazement. This young man, who looked like a simple farm worker, was demonstrating knowledge and skills that impressed even the professional engineers present. Marcus was no longer smiling. He was starting to realize that his cruel challenge might not end the way he had planned. The farm boy seemed to actually know what he was doing, which was impossible, wasn't it? "All right," David said, standing up and wiping his hands on a rag. "Let's see if this works." He walked to the main control panel and looked back at the crowd of people watching him. Marcus held his breath, desperately hoping that the machine would stay broken and prove that he had been right all along. David pressed the power button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the machine began to hum softly as its systems came back to life. One by one, the status lights turned from red to green. The control panel lit up with normal readings, and the machine began operating smoothly, as if nothing had ever been wrong. The crowd erupted in amazed chatter and applause. Even the Global Corp executives were nodding approvingly and looking impressed. David had done the impossible. He had fixed a $2 million machine in less than 40 minutes using basic tools and spare parts that were already available. Marcus stared at the perfectly functioning machine in complete shock. His world had just turned upside down, and he was starting to realize that this was only the beginning of his problems. The sound of the perfectly running machine filled the factory with a gentle, steady hum. Workers cheered and clapped as they watched the expensive German equipment operate smoothly, just like it was supposed to. The control panel showed all green. Lights and every system was working perfectly. Marcus Chen stood frozen in complete shock. His mouth was hanging open and his face had turned pale white. The impossible had just happened right in front of his eyes. The simple farm boy he had tried to humiliate had actually fixed the $2 million machine in less than an hour. That's incredible, whispered Robert Kim, the chief engineer. He was staring at David with amazement and respect. I've been working with machines for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone diagnose and fix problems that quickly. The Global Corp executives were also impressed. They had stopped taking notes and were watching David with genuine admiration. James Mitchell, their leader, walked over to examine the machine more closely. "Young man," James said to David, "that was truly outstanding work. Where did you learn to handle complex machinery like this?" David smiled modestly. "I've always been interested in how things work, sir. My father taught me that if you pay attention and think logically, you can usually figure out most problems." Marcus finally found his voice, though it came out shaky and uncertain. This has to be some kind of trick. Nobody can just walk in and fix equipment like this without proper training and certification." "There's no trick, Mr. Chen," David replied politely. "I just looked at the symptoms, traced the problems back to their source, and made the necessary repairs. The machine itself had most of the parts needed to fix the issues. But Marcus couldn't accept what had happened. His entire worldview was crashing down around him. He had built his identity around being smarter and more successful than everyone else, especially people from rural backgrounds. The idea that a farm worker could accomplish something he couldn't was destroying his ego. "I don't believe it," Marcus said loudly. "You must have had help or someone told you what to do. There's no way a simple country boy could understand equipment this advanced." David's expression remained calm, but some of the factory workers were getting angry at Marcus's continued rudeness. They had just witnessed something amazing, and their boss was being incredibly ungrateful and disrespectful. Just then, Marcus's secretary came rushing across the factory floor looking panicked and out of breath. She was carrying her phone and had an expression of pure terror on her face. "Mr. Chen," she called out urgently. "I just got a call from corporate headquarters. We have a serious problem. Robert Harrison is coming here personally." The blood drained completely from Marcus's face. Robert Harrison was the legendary founder and owner of Global Corp, one of the richest and most powerful businessmen in the country. He was worth over $50 billion and rarely left his corporate headquarters for anything. If Robert Harrison was coming personally, it meant this deal was incredibly important to his company. "When is he arriving?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "His private jet landed 20 minutes ago," the secretary replied. "He should be here within the hour. He said he wanted to personally inspect our facilities and meet with the management team." Marcus felt like he was going to faint. Not only had his main production machine broken down during the most important day of his career, but now the most powerful businessman in the industry was coming to see the disaster firsthand. His dreams of the $50 million contract were turning into his worst nightmare. While Marcus was panicking about Robert Harrison's visit, James Mitchell had been watching David work on some final adjustments to the machine. Something about the young man seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. "Excuse me," James said to David, "but I have to ask, what's your full name? You remind me of someone I know." David looked up from the machine and smiled. "My name is David Harrison, sir." James Mitchell's eyes went wide with shock. "Harrison? Did you say Harrison?" "Yes, sir," David replied. "Is something wrong?" James pulled out his phone and quickly scrolled through his contacts. When he found what he was looking for, his face went completely white. "David Harrison, are you related to Robert Harrison of Global Corp?" David nodded casually. "Yes, sir. Robert Harrison is my father." The factory became so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone stared at David in complete disbelief. The humble young man in work clothes, the one Marcus had insulted and challenged, was the son of the most powerful businessman in the industry. James Mitchell immediately pulled out his phone and made a frantic call. Sir, this is James. You need to know that your son is here at the TechFlow factory. Yes, sir, David is here. No, sir, he's perfectly fine. But there's been a situation. Marcus felt like his world was ending. Not only had he publicly humiliated the son of his most important potential client, but he had done it in front of multiple witnesses who could report everything to Robert Harrison personally. Your father? Marcus whispered, staring at David in horror. Robert Harrison is your father? That's right, David said simply. He's been wanting me to learn more about the family business, so I've been studying different manufacturing companies and their operations. I happened to be driving through town when I heard the commotion at your factory. The other Global Corp executives were now making their own phone calls, probably reporting the entire incident to their headquarters. Marcus realized that within minutes Robert Harrison would know exactly how his son had been treated at TechFlow Industries. But you're dressed like a farm worker, Marcus stammered. You said you work on a farm. I do work on our family farm, David explained. My father believes that hard work and staying humble are more important than wearing expensive clothes or showing off wealth. He taught me to judge people by their character, not their appearance or bank account. Marcus suddenly understood the terrible irony of the situation. He had spent the entire morning trying to impress Global Corp with his wealth, his expensive clothes, and his sophisticated equipment. Meanwhile, the heir to the Global Corp fortune had been standing right there, in simple work clothes, and Marcus had treated him like dirt. I need to sit down, Marcus said weakly, looking around for a chair. His legs felt like they might give out at any moment. David walked over to Marcus with genuine concern. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Chen? You look very pale. Even now, after everything that had happened, David was showing kindness to the man who had tried to humiliate him. This made Marcus feel even worse about his behavior. Why didn't you tell me who you were? Marcus asked desperately. David shrugged. You never asked. Besides, I wanted to see how you treated people when you thought they couldn't do anything for you. That tells you a lot about someone's true character. In the distance, the sound of expensive cars pulling into the factory parking lot could be heard. Robert Harrison had arrived, and Marcus knew that his business career was probably about to come to a very unpleasant end. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the factory parking lot. Marcus Chen stood near the window, watching in terror as a convoy of black luxury vehicles pulled up outside his building. He could see at least 6 expensive cars, including a Rolls-Royce that probably cost more than his entire annual salary. He's here, Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with fear. Robert Harrison is actually here. David Harrison looked completely calm as he wiped his hands clean with a cloth. He had finished making the final adjustments to the machine, and everything was running perfectly. Unlike Marcus, David seemed genuinely happy about his father's unexpected visit. I wonder why Dad decided to come personally, David said thoughtfully. He usually stays at the corporate headquarters and lets his executives handle these kinds of meetings. James Mitchell, who had been on the phone with Robert Harrison's office, walked over to David with a nervous expression. Your father said he wanted to personally oversee this deal because Global Corp is planning a major expansion. They're looking for a manufacturing partner who can handle billions of dollars worth of contracts over the next 5 years. Marcus felt his knees go weak. Billions of dollars, this deal was even bigger than he had imagined. And now he was about to lose everything because of his cruel treatment of Robert Harrison's son. Through the factory windows, they could see a man in his 60s stepping out of the Rolls-Royce. Robert Harrison was tall and dignified, wearing a simple but expensive suit. Despite his incredible wealth, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. Behind him came a team of corporate executives, lawyers, and assistants. These were some of the most powerful people in the business world, and they were all walking toward Marcus's factory. I'm ruined, Marcus said to himself, collapsing into a nearby chair. My career is over. My company is finished. David heard Marcus's words and actually felt sorry for him. Despite everything the CEO had done, David didn't enjoy seeing anyone suffer. His father had taught him that showing mercy was often more powerful than seeking revenge. Mr. Chen, David said kindly, maybe things aren't as bad as you think. My father is a fair man. If you're honest with him and apologize sincerely, he might be willing to listen. But Marcus was too panicked to think clearly. All he could imagine was Robert Harrison's anger when he learned how his son had been treated. The cruel challenge, the public humiliation, the insults about David's appearance. Everything Marcus had done was going to be reported to the most powerful businessman in the industry. The factory doors opened, and Robert Harrison walked in with his entourage. He was exactly what you would expect from a billionaire, confident, intelligent, and commanding respect just by being present. His eyes immediately found David, and his serious expression changed to a warm smile. "David," Robert Harrison called, out, walking quickly across the factory floor. "What are you doing here, son?" David grinned and ran to his father, giving him a big hug. "Hi, Dad. I was just driving through town when I heard some commotion at this factory. They were having trouble with their main production machine, so I helped them fix it." Robert Harrison looked at the massive German machine, which was now running perfectly and producing high-quality components. "You fixed this by yourself?" "It wasn't too difficult," David said modestly. "Just a few sensor problems and some incorrect wiring. The machine had all the spare parts needed for the repairs." Robert Harrison smiled proudly at his son, then looked around the factory with interest. His eyes fell on Marcus, who was still sitting in the chair looking pale and terrified. "You must be Marcus Chen," Robert Harrison said, walking over with his hand extended. "I'm Robert Harrison from Global Corp. I've been looking forward to meeting you and seeing your facilities." Marcus struggled to stand up and shake hands. His palm was sweaty, and his voice came out as barely a whisper. "Mr. Harrison, it's an honor to meet you, sir." "The honor is mine," Robert replied politely. "I understand my son helped you solve a technical problem today. I hope he wasn't any trouble." This was Marcus's moment of truth. He could lie and try to cover up what had happened, or he could tell the truth and face the consequences. As he looked into Robert Harrison's intelligent eyes, he realized that lying would only make things worse. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus began, his voice shaking, "I need to tell you something important. I didn't know David was your son when he arrived here today." "Oh?" Robert Harrison raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" Marcus took a deep breath and began telling the whole story. He explained about the machine breakdown, his panic about the Global Corp meeting, and his anger when he saw David watching from the entrance. He admitted to insulting David, calling him names, and making the cruel challenge that was designed to humiliate him. As Marcus spoke, Robert Harrison's expression grew colder and more serious. The other Global Corp executives were taking notes and whispering among themselves. Marcus could see his business future disappearing with every word. "So let me understand this correctly," Robert Harrison said when Marcus finished his confession. "You insulted my son because of his appearance, assumed he was incompetent because he works with his hands, and then publicly challenged him while planning to embarrass him when he failed?" "Yes, sir," Marcus admitted quietly. "I was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Robert Harrison was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what he had heard. Then he turned to his team of executives. "Cancel all negotiations with TechFlow Industries immediately. We'll find a different manufacturing partner for our expansion." Marcus felt his heart break as he watched his $50 million dream disappear forever. But Robert Harrison wasn't finished speaking. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "I want word spread throughout the industry about how this company treats people. Any business that judges others by their appearance and shows cruelty to those they think can't fight back doesn't deserve to succeed." The Global Corp team began packing up their materials and preparing to leave. Marcus sat back down in his chair, knowing that his reputation in the business world was ruined. No major company would want to work with TechFlow Industries after this story got out. David walked over to his father and whispered something in his ear. Robert Harrison listened, then smiled and pulled out his personal checkbook. "David reminds me that you made a bet," Robert Harrison said to Marcus. "You promised to pay $10,000 if my son could fix your machine. Well, he succeeded, so you owe him money." Robert Harrison wrote something on the check and handed it to David. "Here you go, son. Though I think you should donate this to a good cause." David looked at the check and laughed. Dad, you wrote this for $10 million, not 10,000. Consider it a bonus for teaching an important lesson about character and humility, Robert Harrison replied. Money can't buy the kind of values that make a person truly successful. As the Global Corp team prepared to leave, Robert Harrison looked back at Marcus one final time. Mr. Chen, my son could buy your entire company with his trust fund money, but he chooses to work with his hands and help others. That's the difference between real success and just having money. David donated the $10 million check to the local technical college, establishing a scholarship fund for students from farming families who wanted to study engineering. He drove home in his father's old pickup truck, content with another day of helping others and staying true to his values. Marcus, meanwhile, faced an emergency board meeting where he had to explain how his arrogance had cost the company its biggest opportunity and probably ended his career. The story of the CEO who insulted a billionaire's son spread throughout the business world, serving as a permanent reminder that treating people with respect and kindness is always the right choice, regardless of their appearance or background.